The following is a recording of our live event, which took place on December 18th, 2025. We hope you enjoy our presentation. I'd like to take a moment to speak briefly to some of the work that takes place on our farm. Pictured here is the Johnny's Research Farm located in Albion, Maine. This is the heart of Johnny's, and it has been since 1975. In all, we manage approximately 200 acres of land across 11 sites in central Maine. Of that, we're trialing crops, producing seed, breeding cultivars, and so forth. As you may already know, we grow and trial varieties on our farm in Maine and the farms of growing partners across the US and Canada, only selecting varieties that meet our rigorous standards. This year, on our Maine farm alone, we planted over 3,200 varieties across 30 miles of bed feed as part of our yearly trialing efforts. Of those, little more than 175 new products met our high standards and were selected from those trials. Our presenters today are Brenna Chase and Rachel Katz. Brenna is the product manager for our product assortment of microgreens at Johnny's. She also manages several other crops, including leafy greens and peppers, and oversees the product development targets of our pepper, Swiss chard, and greens breeding programs. Rachel is our microgreens trial technician, overseeing the multitude of varieties we grow and evaluate within our microgreens trials to parse out subtle differences between varieties and strategies that will help ensure the success of our growers. She also trials the many other crops that Brenna manages. And now I will wait in the wings as Brenna will begin our presentation, which will be followed by our Q&A presentation.
Hi, everybody. So just a quick slide here to just go through what we are hoping to cover in this webinar with you. So we're going to just talk a little bit about how to grow microgreens and then some tips for variety selection, how we differentiate shoots versus microgreens, and then a little conversation about hybrids, OPs, and strain selection and how those differences apply, particularly here in the microgreens. And then we'll talk about the Johnny's mixes that we develop here on the farm. And we'll have some time for questions from you all.
So we're going to start out by talking about the materials that we use for growing microgreens. And I just want to start by saying that there are a lot of materials out there for microgreen growing. And our tools department has done a lot of trialing of materials, trays, soils to choose ones that are very effective and adaptable. And those are the materials that I use. So I am most familiar with them. And that's pretty much what I'm going to talk about today. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to choose a tray. We have these lightweight 10-20 tray systems. These are lightweight trays that come in shallow or deep, and they have either holes or no holes. Choosing shallow ones makes the harvest much easier. You only need to use about an inch of soil, so you can really get closer to it when you use a shallow tray. And those nest inside a tray. You have one that has no holes on the bottom that's white, and then you can nest on top of that a black tray that has holes for drainage. And it's nice that they're color coded so you don't confuse them. Another thing that fits into that shallow 10-20 tray is you could choose a 20-row flat. That's an easy way to regulate seeding density. And it's also good if you're having trouble with too much moisture. It has better drainage. We also have that fit into those lightweight 10-20 trays, 5x5 inserts. Those allow you to do smaller plantings of varieties. You really only want to grow things that germinate and grow at the same rate in the same flat. They have different water needs. So even though mustards and radishes are both fast growing brassica microgreens, radishes can be a week faster growing than mustards. So you really want to keep them in separate flats to help regulate their water use better. We also have a polypro tray system. These are very sturdy and they last a much longer time than those lighter weight trays, but they're not compatible with that lightweight 10-20 tray system. But there is a whole system of those polypro trays. So if you do want to go that route, they come in deep trays, shallow trays, mesh ones, specifically for soil blocking. They even have 2.5-inch pots, so you can grow larger seedlings. You would use for this application a microgreens growing tray, which is a standard open flat with holes in the bottom, and that nests into a polypro shallow tray with no holes. That polypro system also has 5x5 insert pots, which is the same idea as the 5x5 inserts for the lightweight 1020 trays, but they fit into this polypro system instead. Again, this allows you to grow smaller quantities of things. And these are really nice if you're selling live plants into restaurants and you want to sell multiple types of microgreens like herbs or flowers and vegetables, and if you'll be collecting and reusing your trays over time. Now, because these systems aren't totally compatible with each other, you want to make sure when you're ordering things to make sure that you're ordering the ones that do work together. But everything is very well labeled on our website, so you can feel confident that you're making the right decision. Next, you're going to want to choose a growing medium. There are a few different things out there. We use on the research farm potting soil. You want to, when you're choosing a potting soil, you want something that's very well sifted. You don't want a lot of large debris in there because it can get in the way of germination. We have the Johnny's 512 mix or the Fort Light mix from Vermont Compost. The Fort Light mix is a better choice for microgreens than the Fort V because they use finer screens to screen out more of the larger sticks or rocks that you might find. There are also non-soil substrates that you can choose. We sell the TerraFiber hemp grow mat. There's also burlaps or felts. Just make sure that you choose something that's food grade. And basically what you want is something that's going to allow your seeds to get wet. You know, the felt will wick moisture up, the burlap has space in it and it holds some water. The only trick with these non-soil substrates is that they can be tricky with larger or irregular shaped seeds. So you kind of have to be careful about that. So other essentials to consider are location. Where are you going to grow your microgreens? Light is a really important consideration there. Windows, growing on windowsills is not really sufficient. All these crops that you're growing are full sun crops. They're not house plants, which are often tropical understory plants. So you really need to make sure they get sufficient light. To do that, you can grow on a light cart. We have 3 different sizes depending on your needs, or you can grow in a greenhouse. That works really great in mild weather, or if you're already running a greenhouse for other crop production. You would probably need to heat or add light in the winter, depending on your latitude. Another thing to consider is airflow. You're going to probably want fans to reduce moisture in that space where you're growing. All those stems growing together can hold a lot of moisture, and then ultimately rot can be a problem. And then, you know, it almost feels like spontaneous generation when those fungus gnats appear, like where did they even come from? But airflow can really help keep that at a minimum. Fertility is something you're going to need to pay attention to. The seeds themselves do not have enough fertility to carry the plant through the microgreen stage. Potting soil is easy there. There's generally fertility in the potting soil. There are soil-like substrates that don't have fertility, like coconut coir or ProMix. And then certainly the non-soil substrates like the hemp or felt grow mats don't have fertility. So you're going to have to add some for those substrates. And then, of course, water. Water is probably the most important consideration in most microgreen operations. It will make or break your production. Too little or too much, and the seeds won't germinate or grow. There are a few different strategies you could employ for water in microgreens. You can top water with a hose nozzle or a spray bottle, or you can bottom water by putting water into the leak-proof tray that's underneath your tray with holes. And then the capillary action kind of sucks the moisture up through the soil. And that's kind of always why you want to make sure you use both of those kinds of trays. So now you've chosen all your materials. Now, how are you going to grow these microgreens? So first, for the planting, you're going to want to put your growing media in the tray. For soil, you want an even layer of soil, about an inch deep. The TerraFiber hemp grow mats, they come in pre-cut sizes, 10, 20, or cut into 5x5 pieces. You want to sow your seeds at the desired density. Now we have a guide for that for some of our most popular varieties that Joshua will link in the chat in our yield data comparison chart. But generally, we recommend sowing seeds so that they're about 1/8 to 1/4 inch apart. with 6 to 8 seeds per square inch for large seeds and 10 to 12 seeds per square inch for smaller seeds. You're going to want to trial some different seeding densities and take notes. When I started growing microgreens, I would start by weighing the packet. Then I would sow the seeds at the density that I thought looked right. And then I would weigh the seed packet again so I could record how much seed I had used. And then I would take notes over the course of the growing on days to maturity and then yield, and then any problems that I encountered along the way. That way I would know moving forward whether it was too dense or not dense enough. But I'll talk a little bit about seeding density later. And those numbers, that eighth of an inch to a quarter inch apart, that information could all be found in our microgreen growing tech sheet, which Joshua will also drop in the chat. So another thing you want to do when you're sowing your seeds is you want to ensure good seed to soil contact. Now, of course, if you're not using soil, you can't have good seed to soil contact, but it's kind of a good way to think about it. You want to ensure that the seed has access to the right amount of moisture. This is much trickier with non-soil substrates and mats. After seeding, there are strategies you can use. After seeding, you can layer a tray on top and nest it in there to make sure that to hold the moisture in. And then you have to remember to take the tray off when it germinates. But you want to make sure that you run water through the seed system with sufficient quantity and duration so that the seeds don't dry out, but not too much water so that they rot. It's a very delicate balance. One of the really easy things about using soil is that it's actually pretty good at regulating the moisture around the seed. I make sure to press the seed down into the soil to make sure there's good contact. And then we cover the seed to keep it from drying out. We use fine vermiculite. You could also use a fine layer of soil. You could also, just like in the non-soil substrates, you could layer another flat in there to keep the moisture in. Just make sure you remove it after germination. Watering, you need a lot less water pre-germination. You're only losing water from the soil through evaporation at that point. You're not respirating it through the plants. So you want to keep the moisture light at that time. And just after germination as well, you don't really want too much moisture because that is a prime time for damping off and mold development. And you want to decide when to do your watering based on the soil moisture. You're going to need to water more frequently as the plants grow. And you can have in your mind what a loose watering schedule is, but that's all subject to change depending on what you encounter in the soil and what the ambient environment is. Sunnier and warmer weather will increase the need for water. And then you can be surprised, even in winter, a light cart next to a heat pump or a baseboard heater can dry out sooner than you might think. Don't let the soil become parched or dusty. You want to make sure that it maintains kind of an even level of moisture. And remember, as the leaf canopy develops, as the plants continue to grow, overhead water can run off, especially if you're using something light like a spray bottle. So you just want to make sure that you get the soil wet. If you're bottom watering, you're going to water into the leak-proof tray. You want to make sure that the water is high enough to reach the soil through the holes in the top tray. That way the water can wick up the moisture through the soil. And once the soil reaches the desired level of moisture, you want to maybe dump that extra water out from the tray. And then harvesting, you cut at the desired size, which, that's not very indicative of what you should do, but most microgreens crops can be grown to the first true leaf stage. For brassicas, that's about 2 weeks. Radishes gets harvested about before their true leaf stage. That's closer to 7 to 10 days. Radish true leaves can be a little bit hairy and don't have great eating quality. So you really want to harvest your radish microgreens before they get too robust. If you're growing inside under lights, depending on the lights that you're using, you might not get true leaves, and that's totally okay. The quality of the lights or the distance of the lights from the plants will impact the growth. If the lights are far away or they're low intensity, the plants might get a little leggy, kind of stringing up towards the lights. But also if they're very close, the plants might be shorter, they might have thicker stems and more robust leaves. But sometimes the plants that prefer a cooler ambient environment will grow away from the lights rather than towards them, or they can even get some burning on the plant margins. So you really want to take your cues from what the plants are doing when you're deciding on on the harvesting and placement with the lights. Okay, so we've talked about the actual growing in the microgreens. Now we're going to talk about varieties. You know, some varieties are easier to grow than others. What makes varieties easy to grow? This photo here is brassicas. Brassicas are very easy to grow. They have smooth, regular seed that allows for good seed to soil contact. They germinate quickly in just a couple of days. They have fast growth that allows them to use the available water, and there's less time for the water to kind of get out of whack. And they're very adaptable. They're very resilient against water inconsistencies. And they are very good varieties for beginners. Um, so those good varieties are all the brassicas. That includes the mild, spicy, confetti, and kale fetty micro mixes. The kales, mustards, broccoli, cabbage, arugula, mizuna, pak choi, tatsai radishes, all of the brassicas that we sell for microgreens, and also the pea and the sunflower shoots are easy shoots for beginners. We are going to talk more about shoots in a couple of minutes. So there are some varieties or some types that are a little trickier to grow, but not especially hard. And some of them just have tricks. And once you know the tricks, they're much easier to take on. So scallions, for example, like all alliums, scallions need darkness to germinate. So we cover them with soil when we're growing them for microgreens. They can also be a little bit slow growing. So you really want to make sure that you're not overwatering them. Basil, another tiny bit trickier one. It germinates just a little more slowly and grows a little more slowly, enough to introduce some inconsistencies and to make it a little tricky with the water. One of the kind of interesting things about basil seeds is that they get this gelatinous coating when they get wet. And this is actually very helpful in non-soil substrates like the Terra Fiber hemp mat, because it keeps the seed at a more uniform level of moisture. You don't have to worry quite so much about getting that moisture exactly right on those mats, because the seed is doing its own part to keep itself moist. Another one that's kind of an intermediate level are the amaranths, which include the glitter mix, our new glitter mix, and the garnet red amaranth. Now, a lot of people have had a lot of success growing the garnet red amaranth, and they love it because of that beautiful dark fuchsia color, but it does present a few small challenges. It has very small seed, which makes it a little bit easy to overseed, and it has very thin stems, which can make it a little bit more susceptible to rot, especially if it's been overseeded. So what makes varieties more difficult to grow? And basically, this comes down a lot to moisture management, right? If something germinates very slowly, then there's more time for the seed to stay too wet or to dry out. If the seed is an unusual shape, it is difficulty getting good seed to soil contact. Water isn't maintaining sufficient contact with the seed. If the seed is very large or very small, that's also problematic. You know, the larger seeds, the water has trouble permeating that seed coat. The smaller seeds, especially the very small seeds like the woody perennials or parsley or carrots, they often take a long time to germinate, which creates more opportunity for the seeds to get too wet or too dry. Slower growth, same idea, you know, and then thin or wetter hypocotyls. So the hypocotyl is the stem below the cotyledon. The cotyledon are those first leaves that emerge from a seedling, and the hypocotyl is the stem below the cotyledon. But those thin or wetter hypercotyls can get too wet and cause rot or mold, especially if it is seeded very densely. So some notoriously difficult varieties, beet and chard, including the confetti mix. And that is pretty much exclusively about that unusual seed shape. And this can be solved with good seed to soil contact. If you just really make sure that you press that seed down in there and give it a good coating over the top of something, that will help to ensure sufficient moisture. Cilantro is kind of the same idea. That seed is so papery and round, it can be very hard for the moisture to penetrate to where the germ will happen. Um, And you can have more luck actually with the cilantro monogerm varieties that is flat on one side. And that makes it both easier to get contact with the soil, having a little bit more surface area to catch onto, and then also it germinates a little bit faster. So that helps also. And then parsley, lemon balm, and red vein sorrel, they are just very slow growing and have very small seed. So there's a lot of opportunities there for there to be either too much or too little water. Sometimes I grow those kinds of varieties without a leak-proof tray, and that way there's kind of additional drainage happening. And those are also good candidates for the 20-row flats, where there's less soil to accumulate water and more drainage going on. So a few other things to consider um, when you're choosing what microgreens to grow. Varieties, there are a lot of choices out there. You're going to need to think about what you want. Flavors, mild, spicy, sweet, citrus, etc. Color, red, green, purple, diversity, the same things. Quantity, how much are you going to use before it goes by or gets too big? And the difficulty, how far down your microgreen journey are you? Do you want to try something a little more challenging, or do you want to stick with some safe bets? Um, you're definitely going to want to think about seeding density. Seeding density is a very nuanced topic. If it's too sparse, means you're not making good use of your space. That includes your substrate, your nutrients, space in your greenhouse or on your light cart. If it's too dense, it's gonna be more likely to rot. And there's also, a point of diminishing returns. More seed doesn't always mean higher yields. Plants are in competition with each other in that dense growing environment. So they could run out of nutrients before they reach a harvestable size. They might turn yellow or get spotty. And then another thing about that point of diminishing returns, and amaranth is a good example of this, because amaranth seed is so small and it's very easy to overseed, and it has these very narrow stems with kind of a broad leaf canopy. And that creates this canopy where there's an understory coming up of smaller plants that may never catch up. And so, because each plant is not growing to its full capacity, it would probably be better if you didn't even seed those, right? If you just had the things that are growing to their maximum volume. Um, so seeding density can be a little tricky. There's like a Goldilocks zone of the exact right amount, which is why you want to take notes of what you're doing, how much you're seeding, and how much you're harvesting, so you can decide what's working best for your systems. And then, of course, days to maturity. Different crops grow at different rates. You can organize your growing based on those differences by choosing complementary varieties. Of course, if you want to seed and harvest every day, you can make that happen. But if you only want to seed and harvest one day a week, you can grow things that work in 7 and 14 and 21-day rotations. You could grow radishes at 7 days, other brassicas at 14 days, and then basil at 21 days. There's a lot of wiggle room with harvest stage for microgreens. These plants are edible for their whole lifespan. So there's a lot of opportunity for success when it comes to harvest stage. It's a pretty nice thing about microgreens. You can kind of make it fit whatever you want it to be. Um, Now we're going to talk a little bit about shoots. What are the differences between microgreens and shoots? Well, shoots have larger seeds generally than microgreens. The plants get harvested at a larger size. And there are a little bit different, subtle differences in production, and we're going to talk about that next. For shoots production, you want to pre-soak the seed for 12 to 24 hours. Moisture has difficulty penetrating those large seed hulls, so soaking them helps them germinate faster. You want to use an open tray, either a 1020 lightweight tray or the open polypro trays. You want to layer the seed on about an inch of soil. You can use a little bit less soil for peas because they make their own nitrogen. You're going to want to sow the seeds about a quarter of an inch apart, though the peas and the sunflower shoots also can be sown a little bit tighter. But that is a good spacing for our new cucurbit shoots, the cucumber and the melon for shoots. But like with the microgreens, you're going to when you experiment with seeding densities, you're going to want to take notes so that you can know what's working for you in your systems. Then you're going to want to cover your seeds for moisture retention. At the research farm, we use soil. That provides some additional friction while the plants are emerging from the soil, and that can help reduce the seed pods sticking to the shoots. Or you can nest a tray on top like you could do with the microgreens. You just want to make sure you remove those trays after germination. It's definitely not like a set it and forget it kind of system. The water is the same kinds of considerations you would think about for microgreens with top water or bottom water. If you're covering with a tray and watering overhead, just remember to water before you nest that tray on top. And then for the harvesting, each type of shoot gets harvested at a different size, and we provide that information on the web and in the catalog. And jo Joshua will add to the chat the shoots production tech sheet that we have for you guys to access. So now Brenna is going to talk a little bit about how and why we select the varieties that we do for you to grow.
Okay, so when you're thinking about the characteristics or traits that you might need to select a variety, some of the considerations that Rachel's just talked about, you'll want to also be aware of both hybridity and also strain selection. These considerations are important really for all crops, but the implications for microgreens are particular and very important in this crop category for reasons that are going to become clear in just a moment. So just as a refresher for everybody, so hybrids and OPs, F1 or hybrid varieties are the results of a genetic combination or a cross of two distinct inbred lines. The parent lines are crossed, and the seed that results from that combination is harvested. That seed is a hybrid variety. Open pollinated varieties are a particular set of genetics that are reproduced by growing the crop and then harvesting the seed from that crop. That seed then is an OP variety. There's no cross occurring in the open pollinated scenario. So why does it matter for you as the grower? Why is this something that you want to be aware of, paying attention to? For hybrids, hybrid varieties can be really valuable for us because they allow the combination of two distinct sets of genes in that cross. So, for example, we can combine disease resistance with favorable agronomic traits and really improve the ability for a grower to be successful in a certain crop, right? In general, hybrids tend to provide a high degree of uniformity. That's probably one of the most distinguishing factors for hybrids, and also typically increased vigor, potentially increased yield. So for example, in the heading broccoli that's shown here on the top of the slide, a hybrid cross could allow for consistency and predictability in the timing of the head formation, so the harvest timing across the crop. Um, which really contrasts with OP broccolis if grown to a head. Most of them are very variable in the maturity timing specifically, as well as various improvements in the head shape, bead quality, plant stature, like I said, maybe disease resistance. And these types of improvements can be real game changers for a crop at that full size harvest stage. In contrast, for the microgreen broccoli shown at the bottom of the slide, those trait improvements are not realized by the grower or by the customer buying that microgreen. For the micro stage, we're not benefiting from the added value of the hybrid because the plant is being harvested at this very young stage before any of those improved traits are expressed. However, in the case of that microgreen broccoli, we do benefit from having an OP variety for that use. And that is because OP varieties, due to the very straightforwardness of that production that I just described, compared to the complexity of a hybrid production process, the actual production of making the process making the seed, because of that difference, OP varieties take much less time to maintain and are less costly to reproduce, meaning that they're typically much more economical choices. Also, due to the nature of the OPs, that relative simplicity, they tend to have very reliable seed production scenarios, meaning that the seed supply is typically quite stable. So in cases where you don't need those improved disease resistance or specific performance traits at a full-size maturity, OPs can be a much better value and much more well-suited to the crop than a hybrid. So that is often the case in microgreens. The scenarios where we do see hybrids offering value as microgreens tend to be related to unique and strong color expression, and then sometimes unique leaf shape or type. So the microgreens market is dominated by OP varieties. Since that's the case, it's important to understand that not all strains of a single OP variety are created equal. There's a lot of variation here. So just because OPs are not a cross, like a hybrid between two distinct parents, doesn't mean that there's not an opportunity to do breeding improvement or breeding maintenance on that variety. Each OP is a pool of genetics that can contain a wide range of phenotypic expression in that plant. So those possible variations in type will be present at any given time when that crop is grown. You'll see variations emerge. And so a seed company or breeding company can be diligent or not diligent in removing the unfavorable plant types from their production fields and intentional in selecting the plant types that they would like to see dominant in the crop. And because you essentially can have these scenarios where a particular focus or management or lack of management is occurring in the maintenance of the OP, you then can have a lot of variety in what's available on the market within the same name of an OP. So that results in what we call strains. Strains are different iterations or different versions of the same variety available on the market. And different strains can have remarkably different appearances and behavior. So for example, if you were to buy marathon broccoli, which is a hybrid from 3 different sources, each of those plants would still grow up to be marathon broccoli. They're going to look essentially the same. If, on the other hand, you were to buy, let's say, bull's blood beet from 3 different sources or 20 different sources, you may see that each source had a somewhat different version of bull's blood. Here we go, slide moving slow. Okay, so at the micro stage, you might even see that some strains of bull's blood were not red at all. So this is an image of 12 different items purchased, all called bull's blood, that we had in a trial here at Johnny's. So you can see the little tick marks on the trays dividing. There's 3 strips in each tray of bull's blood. So 12 different bull's blood, all of them at the microstage expressing very differently. And so we're just using this example here to illustrate some of the implications of strain variation across sources for an OP. So bull's blood, as you're probably aware, is a beet. It's a red-rooted beet, but red roots in the plant don't necessarily mean that there are red leaves. And red color in the leaves at maturity does not necessarily mean that there'll be red color present in the leaves at a microgreen stage. And so what you find is that there's various iterations, again, of bull's blood that are being maintained typically for bunching use of the greens or actually for root use. And they're relatively similar at those stages and quite distinct at this micro stage. And you can see here that some of them are quite green. There's a few that are very dark red. So selecting for that dark red at the microgreen stage is possible. And if the production or breeding company is managing the strain focused on selecting for that microgrowth stage, then it's possible to achieve a favorable color in this final product. So you can see that here. But if that's not the focus, or if there's not attention to that work, then it won't occur, right? So not all bull's blood strains are being selected actively for use as a microgreen. Therefore, it's important for us to test individual strains actually at the micro level here to see what we have. And that's something that you can do at home if you want to investigate. But it's something that we do here at the Johnny's Research Farm. It's the a huge portion of the work that we do in microgreens is just screening through these different strain iterations and looking for what the actual characteristics are that occur at this microgreen stage. Um, and then we, of course, are able to source specifically for those versions that bring us the best combination of traits for microgreen and avoid those sources that provide an inferior product at this maturity level. So here's another example of characteristics being expressed differently at the micro stage than as a full-size plant. In this case, there's two varieties in the image. Both of them are purple stem mizunas. And in fact, at full size, they're quite similar in the stem color. Here at the microgreen stage, you can see on the right that the stem is indeed bright purple. On the left, it's very pale, and you can imagine, if you were to cut that product, harvest that for final use, you're going to lose that little blush of purple that's occurring right at the base of the stem, right? They're going to be, virtually pure white. So that product then is really not usable at all as a purple stem Mizuna, although at that full size stage, they're both fully a purple stem. Um, and interestingly, that the white stem one that you're seeing there is actually a variety um, that was produced as a replacement for the one on the right, but not tested fully for this use. So as you can see, that investigation for the micro applicability of what seem to be um, equivalent versions of a variety is really, really critical to getting what you want in the end here. So these types of examples exist for many, many OPs out in the world and across many types of microgreens generally. So the takeaway here I want to leave you with is it's just really important to understand both that you should expect to see variability in many microgreens because most microgreens are OPs, and there is variability just inherently built into the picture when you're working with OPs. Expect that. And at the same time, it's important to understand that some strains are better in particular characteristics than others. And so the sourcing and the trialing and understanding what you're getting is really important, even while knowing that there will be some variability inherent in an OP. That's, I think, all the comments here. And I'm going to pass it right back to Rachel to talk about our mixes.
Yes, that variety and strain selection is kind of a huge portion of what we do. And part of that goes into this other big piece of what we do, which is creating and maintaining mixes. When we pull together a mix, we're really trying to take some of the guesswork out of variety selection and pairing for our growers. These photos here are some process photos from when we created our new Amaranth glitter mix. So first, we trial a lot of material to identify individual components. We evaluate based on color and speed of growth. We want to know what is going to grow at the same rate and complement each other as both live product and harvested product. And then we evaluate ratios, which is that bottom slide, the bottom photo in the slide, to help us decide which combination of components looks the best. Sometimes it can take many trials and many iterations to get the components of the ratios correct. And then once we have that information, we take all of the specifications of each of the seed lots into consideration while we're actually mixing the mixes to ensure it performs the same for you every time. Johnny's now has 7 microgreens and shoot mixes. We have 4 brassica mixes, the mild mix, which is a fast growing mix in greens and purples with a mild brassica flavor. We have a spicy mix. That's a fast growing mix in bright green and red with a spicier, kind of more mustardy flavor. The Calfetti mix, which is a fast growing green and purple kale mix with a mild kale flavor. And the confetti mix, which is a very fast growing radish mix in bright shades of purple, pink, and green with a spicy radish flavor. We have the rainbow sprinkles mix, which is a beet and chard mix with a whole rainbow of stem colors and green, pink, and red leaves with a mild earthy flavor. We have our new glitter mix, which is now live on the web, out right now. This is an amaranth mix with beautiful gem tone hues of pink, purple, gold, copper, and green. And it also has a mild earthy flavor. And then we have one shoots mix, the shades of green nasturtium mix, which is blonde, dark green, and kind of a dusty purple leaf with green and pink stems. And it has a sweet, peppery flavor, just like nasturtium flowers, if you've ever eaten those. It's really quite a striking mix. And that wraps up our presentation. But before we take your questions, I just kind of want to say that we put a lot of effort into curating a microgreens and shoot assortment that is going to be consistent, reliable, and fun. Microgreens are kind of fun, and we're excited to help meet your needs and help you grow into whatever kind of microgreens grower that you aspire to be. We love microgreens. We hope you do too.
Thank you, Rachel. Hi, everyone. My name's Liv, and I've been collecting your questions. Thank you for so many great questions. We'll get through as many as we can. We have lots of sort of how to grow questions. Maybe we could start out. Rachel, do you pre-soak your seeds at all?
I only pre-soak my shoot seeds, but I make sure that I pre-soak them at least 12 hours, 24 is better.
Great. And then how many hours of light per day do you recommend?
I mean, the more hours of light they get, the faster they will grow. I would think you would want at least 12. I might be making that up though. It might be in the microgreens production guide. In the summer here, we get quite a bit of light. Brenna, what do you think on the amount of light?
Yeah, I think for micros and shoots, you can really push the hours of light because you're not going to run out of fertility before you get to the growth stage that you want. I don't know beyond like 12 or 14 if that would be recommended, but certainly you could do very long days.
Okay, thank you. And then I know it probably varies a little bit by crop, but is there sort of a recommended temperature range that is acceptable?
It's going to vary pretty dramatically by crop.
Okay.
The optimal temperature for germination is very different for different crops. You're going to need higher temps for germinating basil, for example, or parsley than you might need for cilantro or kale. There is also a lot of wiggle room. So like any ambient house temperature would be fine, I would say, or most ambient greenhouse temperatures also.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. You had mentioned about some crops being, I think maybe it was radish, harvested before the true leaf stage. And there was a question of like, what is the true leaf? And could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So the first leaves that emerge from a plant when it germinates are called the cotyledon. And they tend to be very specific to the species of plant that it is, or the plant family. All of the brassica plants have those little heart-shaped cotyledon. And then the next set of leaves that are particular to kind of the crop more specifically, those are the true leaves. So that's where you get the more diversity of leaf shape amongst the plants. Like a mustard, like the Ruby Streaks mustard green has a very feathery true leaf, whereas the kohlrabi true leaf is much more like kite shaped or rounded.
Great, thank you. There was a question about, if you have any techniques for ensuring that you don't overseed those really small seeds.
Practice, practice, practice. I guess I would say that when you figure out how much seed you want to use, I would probably shift from using weight-based decision making to volume. Like you're going to have a scoop, and that's the amount of seed you're going to want to use for this tray. Um, it can start out as weight because that's kind of easy to do. I mean, I guess it could start out as volume too, and that will help you to limit the number of seed and kind of pace yourself in the seeding if you have a volume that you're looking at and you're like, this is all that I get for this whole tray.
Do you typically seed by hand or with a shaker or?
I seed by hand. I tap it out of the packet.
Yep.
And then except for shoots, because they are, they've been soaking, so they just get sprinkled out of their soaking tub.
Yeah.
And if you're doing a lot at a time, you can use a scoop for that also.
We had one grower who's growing brassica microgreens and noticed that they give off kind of an odor. And is that normal and okay?
It sure is.
It's healthy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good for digestion.
Nice. There were a couple questions about what is recommended or needed for cleaning and sanitizing. I think one person actually wanted to know about sanitizing the seeds themselves, and another person just about, the carts and trays and stuff. I don't know if you could talk a little bit about what you do at the farm.
Yeah, I think we use, there's a lot of products out there. I think we sell some of them. I'm not 100% sure what gets used. That I don't personally do that cleaning work. It is very important to sanitize your materials. We don't treat our seed in any way. We don't sanitize it before we use it. There are some systems that get dirtier than others, I would say. If you're reusing water, it's going to be really, really important to clean your trays. If you have like a nutrient film type system, you're going to want to, where algae builds up, you're going to want to make sure you clean the algae off of everything.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's pretty common to use Sanidate for system components if you need to be cleaning those. And then I believe some folks use hydrogen peroxide like bath for seeds also as a preventative. I don't have information on whether that there's a risk to seed health doing that, but I know that it is done.
Okay.
And Joshua just put the Sanidate link in the chat.
Oh, great.
Okay.
Great. Okay. I guess on to harvesting. We had one person who was wondering if you have any tips for how to harvest without getting a lot of the soil into your micros.
Carefully. I mean, I've seen people kind of tip their trays up and use like shears, like electric garden shears. I use a knife, but you do just have to kind of be careful with it. One of the things, if you start your plants in the dark, or do start them covered with a tray, that can make the hypocotyls a little bit longer, and then you have a little bit more opportunity, more length to harvest. Some hypocotyl are just very long, like broccoli microgreens have very long hypocotyls, and that makes it easier. You can also, if you don't fill your tray with quite a lot of soil, you can have a guide. You can cut over the top and never get quite at soil height. If you just cut kind of above the level of your tray. But it is tricky. It's tricky.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Let's see. We had a question about the monogerm cilantro, which you mentioned. Could you kind of elaborate on what that means to be a monogerm?
Yeah. Do you want to take that, Brenna?
Sure. Yeah. So cilantro seed, naturally, when the seed is formed, has multiple germs inside it, so that there will be more than one plant that grows out of that seed. But the seed can be cracked and split into the individual components. This is there's various crops that have like a compound seed seed formation process. So it's very common to be able to purchase cilantro seeds that have been split. They're called monogerm, and we, as Rachel said, we sell both non-split and also split cilantro, but the monogerm, because the seed is singulated, is much easier to work with, especially in a microgreen scenario where it's really critical that you get the correct space between those very small plants.
Great, thanks.
And it basically becomes, just real quick, Liv, it becomes like a half moon, like the cilantro seed is very round, and then it just, when it's
literally split.
it's literally split
Yeah.
in half.
Yeah.
So it's like this half moon shape where half of it is flat and the other side is rounded. And so that flat side just gets better contact with the soil and the moisture for enabling germination better.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, we had a question from a grower who's had lots of success with different varieties, but is struggling with watercress and wonders if you have any suggestions, tips there.
I wish I could ask that grower some questions because I don't have a lot of trouble with watercress. I guess that's another one that has really small seed, so I would be a little bit cautious about that. We've also had success kind of growing it in pots or even in seedling cells. So I guess I would just caution about using too much seed, kind of getting the water just so, and then maybe try cut. I wish I could ask them what they're already doing so I could help them troubleshoot some solutions. But it mostly comes down to water, almost 100% of the time.
Okay, great. Another person wondered if you could just repeat you had mentioned the major differences between microgreens and shoots. Would you mind just repeating those again?
Yeah, shoots have larger seeds and the plants are larger at harvest. That's pretty much the difference.
Okay. We had a couple people asking about techniques or recommendations for preventing mold and algae. And then also another grower who noted a white web-like structure at the bottom of the plants after germination. Is that mold or is that okay?
Sometimes it's mold and sometimes it's okay. That radicle is like sending out roots, right? And sometimes it's rootlets, and then sometimes it's mold. So you do have to kind of pay attention and see what's going on. I would definitely introduce fans, have increase the airflow in the space to kind of keep mold at bay. The movement of air cannot be overstated how important that is in those growing systems.
Yeah. Okay. We had a question about, what's the recommended best way to store your microgreen seeds? And I can mention that we can pop a link into the chat for, we have a seed storage guide, but what would you also recommend?
Cold and dark
and dry.
And dry. Cold and dark and dry. Yes. So however you can achieve that. Light is going to kill seed. Humidity is going to kill seed, and warm temperatures are going to kill seed. And it's best to take the seed that you're planning to use to the place that you're doing your seeding, rather than like your large container and having that container sit perhaps in the sunlight while you're doing your work. That's an overlooked maybe way of really impacting the shelf life of your seed.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think we'll do one more question, but each of you have to answer it. So what's your one of your favorite microgreens to grow and eat? What do you guys like to do on your own?
You can
I
go
think,
first, Rachel.
oh, thank you, Brenna. I think growing microgreen herbs is really fun. I like doing kind of a smorgasbord of herbs in the 5x5 inserts, you know, some cilantro, some basil, some dill, and just cut them off and top them on whatever meal you're eating. It's like a really fun way to perk up any meal with some fresh herbs any time of year.
I'm gonna go with the garnet red amaranth. I used to grow a lot of microgreens a long time ago when I was a farmer, and you just can't beat that garnet amaranth for just gorgeous, gorgeous color. It's absolutely stunning, and maybe similar to Rachel, it's like very well suited to a little sprinkle, like it it could work on like a dessert plate or something. So
Makes everything pop.
yeah.
Well, thank you both. Thanks for answering all these questions, and I'll pass it over to Joshua just for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Liv. Thank you, Rachel and Brenna, for sharing your knowledge with us today. We appreciate the great questions, everyone. If we didn't answer your question, or perhaps it was a little too nuanced for us to speak to here, like our friend with watercress challenges, please reach out to us. We can take your questions via phone, email, or live chat. Our team of experts is here to help you. A recording of today's presentation, the slide deck, and additional resources will be available at johnnyseeds.com first thing Saturday morning, December 20th. In a moment, you will receive an email with a link to where we will post those resources. And finally, special thanks to all of you who joined us today. We hope you found this presentation informative and helpful as you begin growing or continue to grow microgreens. Until next time, best wishes from all of us, the employee owners at Johnny's, and thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.